He doesn't chase you anymore. He barely replies in time. The affection feels muted, and yet, he still checks your status 10 times a day. You've noticed it, haven't you? That strange energy. The kind that lingers in the air after he leaves the room, like something unsaid, like something unfinished. He pulls away, but never far enough for you to fully let go. Never distant enough to give you peace. Just enough to make you question yourself. But you're tired of questioning, aren't you? This isn't your first time standing in this in-between place, where the silence screams louder than any fight. It's where your heart still beats, but your soul starts whispering, "This is not love, this is a performance." And you're no longer willing to be the only actor on stage. He doesn't know it yet, but the way you look at him has already changed. You no longer wait for his texts like lifelines. You don't rehearse your words to avoid triggering his moods. You no longer fight to be heard, because deep inside, something in you has gone quiet. And in that quiet, there's a shift, a detachment that feels less like loss and more like clarity. There's a certain fatigue that doesn't show in your face, but lives in your bones. It's not the kind of tired sleep can fix. It's the weariness of loving someone who only holds you halfway. It's the exhaustion of begging for crumbs while you're offering banquets. And now you're beginning to see what you couldn't before. You're beginning to understand that his emotional absence wasn't accidental. It was a pattern, a learned behavior, a defense, maybe even a strategy. He stayed close enough to keep you hoping, but far enough to never truly be vulnerable, to never truly risk being known. And you played along, for a long time, because you believed in potential, because you saw the version of him he couldn't see for himself, because your love was patient, forgiving, endlessly loyal. But love, no matter how deep, cannot build a bridge alone. And now, the weight of that bridge has become too much to carry. There's a moment, a quiet one, when everything shifts. It doesn't come with shouting. It doesn't come with drama. It's the moment you stop explaining. The moment you stop hoping he'll see you. And instead, you begin to see yourself clearly, without the distortion of needing to be chosen. That's when it begins. That's when he starts to feel the absence he thought would never come. It's subtle at first. He wonders why you didn't text good night, why your responses feel different, why your energy is no longer wrapped around his validation. He won't say it, not out loud, not even to himself, but he'll feel it, because energy doesn't lie. And yours is shifting from seeking to seeing, from hoping to knowing, from giving to holding. You're no longer chasing, you're observing, you're reclaiming your space. And whether he admits it or not, he feels the ground beneath him start to change. But still, he won't admit it. Not yet. Not when he's still hiding behind ego. Not when he's still pretending your silence doesn't bother him. He'll brush it off. Say you've been busy. Tell himself you're just in a mood. But deep down he knows something is slipping, something sacred, something he took for granted. And that's the moment he realizes he's losing you. Quietly, irrevocably. But his pride won't let him name it. His fear won't let him face it. And so, he pretends. He scrolls through your photos, checks your last scene, hears your voice in the silence, but still says nothing. But you know, you feel it. The shift inside, the quiet departure of your spirit from a place it no longer belongs. You feel the release. The ache is still there. Yes, but it no longer paralyzes you. It guides you. And that guidance is louder than his silence has ever been. He doesn't know yet, but you do. You feel it. He's losing you. Quietly. But he won't admit it. Not yet. You tried to make it work. You read the books. You changed your tone. You gave space, then gave closeness. You apologized even when you weren't wrong. You bent yourself into shapes no one saw, because deep down, a voice kept whispering, "If I just do it right, maybe this time, he'll stay." But he didn't stay. Not really. His body was there. His messages still came. But something about his presence felt like an echo, like hugging someone through glass. You kept reaching, hoping one day he'd meet you halfway. But what you didn't realize was you were always the only one reaching. It wasn't love. It was effort. It was survival dressed as connection. And here's what stings the most: you did it because you thought you had to. Because somewhere in your story, someone taught you that your worth must be earned. That being loved means performing, pleasing, proving. So you kept trying, not because you were blind, but because you were conditioned. You stayed because you remembered the good moments, those rare sparks where he saw you really saw you, and you clung to those glimpses like they were promises. But they weren't. They were just flashes, temporary kindness from someone who never fully held your heart with both hands. And still, you stayed. Because in your core, you weren't just trying to save the relationship. You were trying to heal the wound that came long before him, the one carved in silence when you were little. When you reached for love and were met with emotional absence. When you cried and no one came. When you learned that being seen required being small, quiet, convenient. Carl Jung called this the repetition compulsion. It's not just psychology, it's lived experience. It's that unconscious pull toward people who remind you of those original wounds. Not because you want to be hurt again, but because your soul hopes, just maybe, this time the ending will be different. That this time, the story will rewrite itself. But the ending never changed. He triggered the same ache, the same self-doubt, the same exhaustion, because he wasn't here to love you. He was here to mirror what you had not yet healed, and you didn't know it. Not at first. You thought the pain meant depth, that the struggle meant significance, that the tears meant you cared. But pain is not proof of love, it's proof of misalignment. You weren't crazy. You weren't needy. You were responding to an energetic wound you didn't know you had. That need for validation, that fear of being left, that ache when he pulled away, it wasn't just about him. It was about every time you were made to feel invisible and had no words for it. And this is where the truth gets uncomfortable. You weren't in love with him. You were in love with who you hoped he'd become. You saw the potential. The soft version of him that showed up once in a while, between the cold spells and dismissive tones. The one who held you when you broke down, even if he was the reason you shattered. And that sliver of warmth made you believe that maybe, if you just loved him right, he'd become the man you needed. But love doesn't work that way. You cannot mother someone into becoming whole. You cannot bleed enough to fill someone else's emotional void. And you cannot keep losing yourself in the process of trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Because at some point, you have to ask, why do I keep calling this love? Why do you keep investing in patterns that drain you? Why do you keep choosing people who confirm your deepest fears that you're not enough, not chosen, not worthy of consistency? The answer is not in him. It's in the wound. It's in the unconscious pull that makes chaos feel like chemistry, that makes emotional neglect feel familiar, that makes your body tighten when love feels too calm, too easy, too safe, because part of you only knows love through pain. But now, you are waking up. You are starting to see the loop. The same story playing out in different bodies, different names, same ache. And this time, something inside you refuses to play along. You're not willing to chase someone who makes you feel small anymore. You're not willing to abandon yourself to feel temporarily held, because now you know. You were never truly held by him. You were holding the relationship on your own, hoping that if you held tight enough, he'd finally grip back. But he never did. Because he couldn't. Not because you weren't enough, but because he was never ready to meet you at the depth where love truly begins. And maybe, just maybe, now for the first time, you're ready to stop reaching for someone else's hand and start reaching inward, toward the part of you that has always deserved more than almost. You weren't in love with him. You were in love with who you hoped he'd become. There is a kind of love that doesn't feel like love at all. It feels like hunger, like running barefoot across glass, hoping you'll finally be seen if you just bleed enough. And the strangest part is, it starts long before the man, long before the relationship. It starts in a room you barely remember, with a silence you never chose. Imagine a little girl. She is quiet, observant. She learns early that softness is inconvenient, that her needs are too loud. So she begins to disappear, slowly, politely. She shrinks her voice. She studies the moods of those around her like weather. She adapts, not because she wants to, but because she has to. She doesn't know it yet, but this will become her love language. Fast forward years later, she meets a man. He's distant, elusive, sometimes warm, mostly cold, and something inside her lights up, not because he makes her feel safe, but because he makes her feel familiar. He is not the beginning, he is the continuation. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the part of ourselves we disown, the traits and emotions we bury because they once brought pain, shame, or rejection. And when that shadow goes unintegrated, it doesn't vanish, it waits. It finds its way back into our lives through attraction. You did not fall for him by accident. You were drawn to what remained unresolved in you, not because you are broken, but because the psyche longs for wholeness. And what the conscious mind rejects, the unconscious will seek out in people, in patterns, in pain. That is shadow love. You were chasing not him, but the part of you that still needed to feel worthy in the eyes of someone who wouldn't give it. You were replaying a wound, hoping this time it would heal differently. That maybe, if he finally saw you, it would rewrite every moment you felt invisible. But here is the truth you weren't ready to see until now. He wasn't avoiding you. He was avoiding himself reflected in you, because you were the mirror. Every part of him he refused to face, the fears, the doubts, the deep, aching need to be loved that he learned to bury, he saw in your eyes. And it terrified him, because when someone sees you fully, you can no longer hide, and he wasn't ready to be seen. So he pulled away, not because you were too much, but because you were too real, too revealing, too close to the truth he had worked hard to avoid. You triggered his shadow just as he triggered yours. It was never about who you were. It was about what you represented. To him, you were a reflection. To you, he was a rescue mission. And this is the tragic loop: two people, drawn together not by love, but by unhealed pain. One running, one chasing, one hiding, one performing, both calling it connection, when really, it was reenactment. But here's where the shift happens. The moment you realize that the love you gave him was the love you needed to give yourself all along, that the validation you sought in his arms was meant to come from within, that the warmth you were begging for was the warmth you were born to hold for yourself. You see, shadow work isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering what you've buried, the rage, the grief, the longing, the truth. It's about calling back the parts of you you left behind to survive. It's about looking into the mirror and saying, I see you, all of you, even the parts that hurt. Because once you do that, the chase ends. You no longer run toward those who cannot stay. You no longer beg those who cannot hold. You no longer confuse silence for peace. You begin to choose differently, not from hunger, but from presence, not from fear, but from fullness. And in that fullness, you begin to love differently too. Not to fix, not to be chosen, but to share, to see and be seen, with no masks, no roles, no chasing, because now you understand. This was never about love. It was about reflection. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she simply stops explaining, not because she no longer cares, but because she finally does. It doesn't begin with a loud argument or a grand decision. It begins in silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be understood anymore, the kind that no longer waits for him to ask, "What's wrong?" Because this time she knows. What's wrong is not something he's ever tried to understand. You remember that day. He got cold again, distant, passive. He rolled his eyes at your concern. He brushed off your words with that familiar, dismissive tone. And for the first time, you didn't explain. You didn't soften your voice. You didn't list all the reasons he was hurting you. You didn't cry or plead or beg for a little tenderness. You just stayed quiet, not out of fear, not out of anger, but from a place deeper, a place called knowing. Carl Jung once said, "Withdrawal is not escape, it is power in disguise." And you felt that power the moment you realized your silence was not weakness. It was a boundary, an invisible line drawn not to punish, but to protect. It wasn't the silent treatment. It was sacred stillness, a way of reclaiming yourself, because for so long, you believed that love meant constant communication, that if you just found the right words, he'd finally hear you, that if you explained your pain well enough, he'd stop causing it, that if you stayed kind, stayed patient, stayed forgiving, he'd finally grow. But now, you understand. No amount of clarity can reach someone who chooses not to listen. No softness can soften a heart committed to staying closed. No love can transform someone who hasn't chosen their own growth. So, you stopped trying, and it shook him, because he was used to the performance, the explaining, the tears, the fight to stay connected. He mistook your emotional labor for love. He believed as long as you were reacting, you were still invested, still hooked, still his. But when you stopped defending yourself, when you let his accusations hang in the air without response, something inside him shifted. He started to feel the absence. Not just your words, but your energy. The way your presence used to reach for him, even when he was cold. The way you used to meet his distance with effort. The way you used to chase the closeness he never truly offered. And now, nothing. No reaction. No emotional proof he could use to validate his story. Just quiet. And it terrified him. Because silence, when it comes from peace, is louder than any scream. It says, "I am no longer trying to be chosen. I am choosing myself." You stopped proving your love. You stopped defending your needs. You stopped arguing about respect because you knew that if someone needs to be convinced to value you, they never really did. And here's what most people won't tell you. That moment, the one where you choose stillness over struggle, is when everything changes. You are no longer a participant in the performance. You are no longer playing the role of the understanding partner. You are no longer carrying the emotional weight of a man who cannot carry himself. You are simply being, whole, present, untouched by the chaos he's trying to provoke. And when he tries to test you, when he brings up the past, throws subtle jabs, waits for you to defend yourself, you just look at him, not with anger, not with desperation, but with the quiet sadness of someone who has outgrown the need to be misunderstood. Because you're done arguing with someone who only listens to their own echo. This is not about revenge. This is not about punishing him. This is about the day you realized that every time you explained yourself, You are asking for permission to be who you already are. And you no longer need permission. You no longer need his understanding to feel valid. You no longer need his approval to feel enough. You no longer need to play small to keep the peace. You are the peace. And that, more than anything, is what unsettles him now. The new version of you, the one who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't plead, is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things are powerful because they cannot be controlled. So when he looks at you now, he doesn't see the same woman who used to bend just to hold him closer. He sees someone who is no longer trying to hold anyone who does not choose to stay. Have you ever gone silent? Not from pain, but peace. If you have, you know. That is the moment you return to yourself. Not louder, just deeper. Not colder, just clearer. Not angrier, just done. He didn't lose you when you walked away. He lost you the moment your eyes no longer searched for his. The moment your silence wasn't a trap but a sanctuary. The moment you stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped offering parts of yourself to someone who never truly held them. Men often don't realize what they've lost when the goodbye is spoken. They realize it in the echo, in the space you used to fill without even trying, in the soft rhythm of your presence that once anchored their chaos. They feel it not in your absence, but in your energy's retreat. You used to check in. Now you don't. You used to remind him gently. Now you let things be forgotten. You used to respond quickly, carry conversations, make excuses for his moods, but now there is space, a pause, a stillness. At first, he thinks it's just a phase, that you're pulling back to test him. He convinces himself that you'll return because that's what you always did. But days pass, and the messages stay unread. The phone doesn't light up like it used to. He scrolls through old chats, searching for the moment it changed, for the words you didn't say, for the warmth that is no longer there. And suddenly, the emptiness grows louder. Carl Jung once wrote, "Man meets his anima through the woman who no longer waits." The anima, in Jungian psychology, is the feminine soul image within every man. And often he only meets her through the woman who stops trying to be chosen, the woman who no longer fills in the blanks for him, the one who finally lets him face the mirror. You were that mirror, but he didn't want to look, not when it was easier to minimize you, to keep the power dynamic comfortable, to believe that your love would always be there, no matter how little he gave in return. But now, it's different. Now, you've stopped giving, not out of anger, but because you've remembered how to give to yourself. You've stopped showing up to convince him of your value. And in that moment, his illusion breaks. He starts to feel the void, not because you said anything, not because you slammed the door, but because you disappeared from his emotional radar. Because the tether he used to feel, the one he never acknowledged but always relied on, is gone. And now, he is left with himself. This is the part he never saw coming. He assumed you would always be the soft place to land, the one who forgives, who explains, who reaches out first. But when that energy disappears, he is forced to confront a truth. He's never prepared for that love cannot be sustained by one person alone. He begins to sense your freedom. It unnerves him. The way you carry yourself now, unburdened. The way your voice has changed, not colder, but clearer. The way your laughter no longer waits for his attention to feel valid. It makes him wonder, not out loud. He'll rarely say it. His pride won't let him. But inside, the questions swirl. Does she miss me? Has she moved on? Why does it feel like she's further away now than when she was physically close? Because now, he feels the real loss, not of your body, but of your essence, the essence that used to try, that used to adjust, that used to bend to make him feel like enough. And now, it's gone. That's when he starts to scroll your photos, reread your old messages, listen to a voice note he never deleted. That's when he lingers a little longer on your social media, trying to decode your silence. That's when he reaches out with vague questions, testing the waters, seeing if the version of you he once knew is still there. But she's not, because now you are whole in a way he never expected. You've returned to yourself, not in defiance, but in truth. And the woman he used to rely on no longer plays by the same emotional rules. He cannot say it, he won't admit it, but he knows. He lost you, not when you stopped loving him, but when you started loving yourself more. By the time he realized, you were already free. You're no longer waiting to be chosen. There's a quiet power in that sentence, one you may not have felt before, not when you were still hoping, not when your worth was still wrapped around whether someone stayed or left. But something has shifted. Now, you walk differently. Not faster, not louder, just lighter. The weight of needing to be picked has fallen off your shoulders. The ache to be seen, to be wanted, to be enough for someone else's seat no longer drives your every move. And it's not because you've stopped loving. It's because you've started loving from a different place, from fullness. You see, there comes a time when you realize that your energy is sacred, that your attention, your softness, your care are not things to be handed out in hopes of being noticed. They are gifts, and not everyone is meant to receive them. Carl Jung called this process individuation. It is the path of becoming whole, not through someone else's validation, but through the integration of everything you are. The strong parts, the fragile parts, the shadows you once tried to hide, the wounds you tried to cover with romance and attention. Now you no longer seek wholeness in someone's gaze. You find it in the way you move through the world without shrinking, in the way you choose yourself not as a defense, but as a declaration. You've stopped performing. You've stopped shrinking your brilliance so someone else could feel big enough to stay. You've returned to yourself, not as a reaction to being hurt, but as an act of reverence. And now, when someone approaches, you no longer ask, will they pick me? Instead, you wonder, do they match my peace? That's what changes everything, because now, your energy no longer chases, it no longer clings, it simply exists, steady and full. And in that stillness, you begin to attract differently. Not from hunger, but from alignment. Not from need, but from clarity. You've stopped living like a question mark. You are no longer the girl who waits for the text, who replays every word, who bends to make herself more appealing. You are the woman who understands that love does not require you to abandon yourself. That kind of love, the one that costs your peace, is no longer something you desire. It no longer pulls at you the way it once did. Because now, the silence inside you is not empty. It's sacred. It's the sound of someone who has finally come home. You don't fear the pause between connections. You don't rush to fill the space. You let it be. You let yourself breathe. And in that space, something else awakens. A new kind of magnetism. The kind that comes not from your looks, or your charm, or how well you play the game, but from presence, from truth, from the unshakable knowing that you do not need to be chosen to matter. You matter because you exist. You matter because you've chosen yourself. So now, you walk under the evening sky, the sun low, golden. Your steps are slow, unhurried. You're not waiting for anyone to catch up. You're not looking back to see if he's watching. You just walk, whole, quiet, free. This is not the ending. This is the return to the version of you that was never broken, only buried. The one who no longer lives in reaction to rejection. The one who knows that love, when it comes, will not feel like war. It will not confuse you. It will not demand proof. It will meet you in peace. And if it doesn't, you will not stay. Because now, you're not waiting. You're not begging. You're not chasing. You are. And that is more than enough. If you've felt this shift, if something in your life has turned quietly, slowly, powerfully, share in the comments. Your story could be someone's mirror, a reminder that they're not alone, that the return to self is not only possible, it's sacred. He didn't lose you when you left. He lost you the moment you stopped chasing. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't happen with a slammed door or a final message. It happened in silence, in a shift so subtle he didn't notice it at first. But eventually, he felt it. The way your energy no longer wrapped around his name, the way your heart no longer reached for him across the spaces he refused to close. You see, you had chased for too long, not always with your feet, but with your soul. You chased his attention, his effort, his reassurance. You chased connection, understanding, presence. You poured yourself into the gaps he never tried to fill. You gave him soft words in exchange for silence, loyalty in exchange for distance, depth in exchange for surface. But chasing does something cruel to the spirit. It teaches you to believe that your value lies in being chosen, that if you're just loving enough, patient enough, giving enough, someone will finally stay. But that belief is a lie, a beautiful, painful lie that costs you parts of yourself you were never meant to trade, until one day you stop. Not because you stopped loving, but because you started remembering who you are, what you deserve, what you will no longer carry. That's when the journey begins. First comes the awareness, the moment you see the pattern clearly, the same cycle in a different face, the same ache disguised as love. And it hits you, not like lightning but like stillness, like the quiet after a storm. You no longer deny it, you simply see it. Then comes the release. You begin to let go of the stories, the hope, the fantasy of what he could be, if only he tried. You stop trying to make it work. You stop explaining your worth. You stop making room for someone who keeps leaving. And that release, it's not about him. It's about you. It's about choosing peace over proof, presence over performance. And then, something even more powerful unfolds. You return to yourself, to the woman you were before the hunger, before the ache, before you confused love with emotional labor. She is still there, quiet, strong, waiting. And when you return to her, everything changes. You no longer need to be chosen. You no longer ask, "What did I do wrong?" You no longer carry the burden of someone else's emotional unavailability. Instead, you sit in your own presence, whole, clear, unshaken. And that is the moment he loses you. Not when you pack your things, not when you stop answering, but when you stop waiting, when you stop reaching, when you stop giving to someone who only knows how to take. That is the moment he begins to feel the absence, the real absence, not of your body, but of your essence. The warmth that no longer bends toward him, the softness that no longer seeks his approval, the energy that used to chasten standing still. And there's nothing louder than that kind of silence. He will miss the way you saw him, even when he couldn't see himself. He will miss the way you loved him, not perfectly, but fully. He will remember your laughter, your care, the way you made space for his messiness. And he will wonder why none of it feels the same anymore. But by then, it's too late. Because you have stepped into a different kind of love. One that does not need permission. One that does not ask to be validated. One that begins and ends within you. And here's the truth. You never really needed him. What you needed was to see yourself through your own eyes, not his. What you needed was to feel whole without earning it through pain. What you needed was already inside you, waiting for the moment you stop searching outside of yourself. Now, you are no longer the girl who waits. You are the woman who walks, not away but forward, toward herself, toward peace, toward a life that doesn't ask her to shrink or perform. He didn't lose you when you left. He lost you the moment you stopped chasing. If this story speaks to your soul, leave a comment. Your voice could echo in someone else's silence. And if you want more moments like this, if you want more stories that meet you where you are, hit subscribe. Let's walk this journey together, one truth at a time, one return at a time, back to who you were always meant to be.